Indeed underway to hash out the pros and the cons of another round, perhaps, of economic stimulus. Chief economics reporter Steve Leisman joins us with a look at what they can do compared to what they may do. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Sue, thanks very much. A big debate out there, as Rick said, and we'll talk about where that debate is as I get to some interesting graphics in just a minute. Let's look at the Fed options here. One thing they could do with this Operation Twist, again, this is selling short-dated, buying longer-dated securities, is for reinvestment only. But they could also do a broader program. I'll remind you of the CNBC Fed survey. $391 billion is the average for how big our market participants believe the size of the program will be. If it's reinvestment only, it'll be for a much smaller amount. I will tell you that the debate is, does the Fed do this in the 5 to 10 bucket, or does it go out further than 10 years and go in the 10 to 30 bucket? What's wrong with the 10 to 30 bucket is the Fed doesn't really have the liquidity there. It doesn't like to have a big percentage of all the outstanding securities. Other options on the table. The communication strategy, if we can get to that next one. Pegging the policy to the unemployment rate. Charlie Evans discussed that with us last month. Likely it's just a discussion now, and we're calling this the Charles Committee because, as you know, Charles Prosser and Charlie Evans have been put in charge of a committee that might look at how the Fed might communicate to markets for how long interest rates would be low. Other options on the table. More quantitative easing. I am kind of discounting that for this moment. I think there are other things the Fed might try first, and then lower the interest rate on excess reserves. Yeah, sure, 25 basis points, Tyler, but it's a really one and done thing, right? You go down 25 down to 0, and then what do you do for tricks after that, Tyler?
Yes, America is in real trouble as Wall Street protest begins, with demonstrators blocked. For months, the protesters had planned to descend on Wall Street and occupy parts of it as an expression of anger over a financial system that they say favors the rich and powerful at the expense of ordinary citizens. As it turned out, the demonstrators found much of their target off limits as the city shut down sections of Wall Street near the New York Stock Exchange and Federal Hall well before their arrival. By 10 a.m. Saturday, metal barricades manned by police officers ringed the blocks of Wall Street between Broadway and William Street to the east. In a statement, Paul J. Brown, the police department's chief spokesman, said, "A protest area was established on Broad Street at Exchange Street, next to the Stock Exchange, but protesters elected not to use it. Organizers, promoters, and supporters called the day, which had been widely discussed on Twitter and other social media sites, simply September 17th. Some referred to it as the United States Day of Rage, an apparent reference to a series of disruptive protests against the Vietnam War held in Chicago in 1969. The idea, according to some organizers, was to camp out for weeks or even months to replicate the kind, if not the scale, of protests that erupted earlier this year in places as varied as Egypt, Spain, and Israel. Bill Stewart, 68, who lives in Forest Hills, Queens, stood near the barricades at Wall Street and Broadway and shouted, "Shut down Wall Street, 12 noon, you're all invited," as tourists gazed quizzically at him. Talking to a reporter, he elaborated, "You need a scorecard to keep track of all the things that corporations have done that are bad for this country." Nearby, Micah Chamberlain, 23, a line cook from Columbus, Ohio, said he had hitchhiked to New York. "There are millions of people in this country without jobs," he said, "and 1% of the people have 99% of the money." Throughout the afternoon, hundreds of demonstrators gathered in parks and plazas in lower Manhattan. They held teach-ins, engaged in discussion and debate, and waved signs with messages like "Democracy, not corporatization," or "Revoke corporate personhood." Organizers said the rally was meant to be diverse, and not all of the participants were on the left. Followers of a fringe political candidate formed a choir near Bowling Green and sang the Star-Spangled Banner and the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Nearby, anarchists carried sleeping bags and tents. At one point in the early afternoon, dozens of protesters marched around the famous bronze bull on Lower Broadway. When you idolize financial markets as salvific, you embrace the idea that profit is all that matters, said one protester. A few minutes later, about 15 people briefly sat down on a sidewalk on Broadway, leaning against a metal barricade that blocked access to Wall Street. For a moment, things grew tense as officers converged and a police chief shoved a newspaper photographer from behind. After a police lieutenant used a megaphone to tell those sitting on the sidewalk that they were subject to arrest, the protesters got up and marched south. Mr. Brown said no permits had been sought for the demonstration, but plans for it were well known publicly. He also said 2 people in bandana masks were taken into custody for trying to enter a building at Broadway and Liberty Street that houses Bank of America offices. A 3rd person fled. As a chilly darkness descended, a few hundred people realized one of the day's objectives by setting foot onto Wall Street after a quick march through winding streets, trailed by police scooters. At William Street, they were blocked from proceeding toward the stock exchange, and the march ended in front of a Greek Revival building housing Cipriani Wall Street. Patrons on a 2nd-floor balcony peered down. As some of the patrons laughed and raised drinks, the protesters responded by pointing at them and chanting, "Pay your share." In other words, Wall Street does not really represent mainstream America, and it's not really based on reality whatsoever. There's also something much more going on here, and this too is another sign of the end times, transition days, which is a day-by-day process of extraordinary happenings, changes, and events. Everything is connected, and everything is numbered. It's also called fate or destiny, because it's about what kind of world are we leaving to the future generations. Again, Revelation chapter 16. And I heard a great voice out of the temple, saying to the 7 angels, Go your ways, and pour out the vials of the wrath of God upon the earth. 2. And the first went, and poured out his vial upon the earth, and there fell a noisome and grievous sore upon the humans, which had the mark of the beast, and upon them which worshipped his image. 3. And the second angel poured out his vial upon the sea, and it became as the blood of a dead man, and every living soul died in the sea. 4. And the third angel poured out his vial upon the rivers and fountains of waters, and they became as blood. 5. And I heard the angel of the waters say, Thou art righteous, O Lord, which are, and was, and shall be, because thou hast judged thus. 6. For they have shed the blood of saints and prophets, and thou hast given them blood to drink, for they are worthy. 7. And I heard another out of the altar say, Even so, Lord God Almighty, true and righteous are thy judgments. 8. And the fourth angel poured out his vial upon the sun, and power was given unto him to scorch humans with fire. 9. And humans were scorched with great heat, and blasphemed the name of God, which has power over these plagues, and they repented not to give him glory. 10. And the fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom or nation was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain. 11. And blasphemed the God of heaven because of their pains and their sores, and repented not of their deeds. 12. And the sixth angel poured out his vial upon the great river Euphrates, and the water thereof was dried up, that the way of the kings or rulers of the east might be prepared. I tell the truth, it's time for all prophecy to be fulfilled, and these are more signs. The time is right now.